Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We will get started here shortly. During the session, we will have a chat and Q&A session that will be open for any questions that you ask. This webinar will be recorded, and we will send out a copy of that as we go through. Please feel free to ask any questions in the chat and in the Q&A function. We will actually not. We will actually have a session for answering questions at the end so that we're not stopping the presentation every few minutes just to answer questions. But if there is something that we can fit organically into the presentation to answer for you, by all means, please feel free to ask your questions. So today's session is going to go over the flipped classroom, especially the implementation of that in the Navigate platform. And just for awareness sake, we will have an additional webinar for the flipped classroom hosted by Dave Page at the end of this month on April 30th. We will have a separate registration for that will dive deeper into the philosophy and the implementation of the flipped classroom and the reason for its success. So for today's webinar, just as an introduction, we're going to give a brief overview of the flipped classroom. We're also going to talk about a little bit about the development of the flipped classroom, how to implement this, and the tools and resources that are available for instructors. And then we'll do a wrap up and review and Q&A at that time. So for anyone who is not familiar with the concept of a flipped classroom or has heard this as a buzzword, not really sure where to start, or maybe this is something that you have already implemented, but maybe don't realize you have or would like to expand on that, we want to give a little bit of a background on what a flipped classroom is. At a very basic level, this is a blended learning model that introduces students to basic concepts before the more complex topics or skills can be addressed in class in front of an instructor or to give more context. This is also going to mean that content is presented dynamically. That way we're avoiding a reliance on one type of content delivery. Studies have shown that if someone is just reading something, if somebody is just watching something or listening to something, at a certain point there's retention fall off. So the flipped classroom will deliver a lot of the components and a lot of the education in different media deliveries. That could be videos, that could be reading, that can be hands-on activities. We also want to engage emotion as part of that because that is also more likely to be something that will carry over into long-term memory. This will give an opportunity for the instructor to let the students lead the experience as opposed to a typical scenario where students are typically sitting and listening to somebody lecture at the front of the classroom. In this aspect, with the flipped classroom, we're actually inviting them to come onto the stage and be part of that discussion, be part of that education. So just to kind of expand on that, media is presented in the forms of videos, podcasts, or interactive lessons, in the form of interactive lectures, interactive modules. We will have additional articles that they have to watch or read. Students are also given clear, explicit direction on which objectives to focus on for every single lesson. Complex items and more hands-on practice are saved for the in-class time. So this will give the students the opportunity to to really understand what the concepts and skills they should be aware of before they actually start each lesson. They're also going to be told to actually read the chapters or read the sections out of the chapters before they come to class. That way you're not just reinforcing or repeating the same content over and over. To that end, the flipped classroom is going to be divided into lessons as opposed to a rigid structure of chapter by chapter. You'll see here kind of represented on the left in a typical layout of the flipped classroom. We have lesson 1 that may cover multiple chapters. We have lesson 2. It is not going to be chapter 1, 2, 3. It's actually going to be components of multiple chapters or sections of a chapter. We're also going to have callbacks. That way we might have something with trauma that also deals with pediatric content, and we're going to combine multiple sections or multiple chapters to address that. A lot of this will speak to the way that the body or the brain will handle memory. It was long believed that there were only 2 forms of memory, short-term and long-term memory. And over the last 30, 40 years, research has shown that we actually have multiple types of memory that are engaged. Semantic memory are your basic facts and vocab words. And this is actually the way that a lot of traditional learning or teaching is done by semantic memory. You have concepts that are just reinforced over and over, visually over text or maybe verbally. But then you have sensory memory, you have episodic memory, procedural memory being the steps one, two, three. How do I cook? How do I cook scrambled eggs? How do I ride a bike? We want to engage all of these together. Semantic memory is the most basic memory that we think of when we recall or memorize basic facts. This could be through memorization and mnemonic devices as well. Episodic memory, on the other hand, is personally experienced memory. It allows a person to memorize information as part of a narrative. So with the flipped classroom, we actually want to engage a lot of that episodic memory, make the students involved with the learning experience. There is a recent study by Dr. Paul E. King in the Department of Communication Studies at Texas Christian University, writing a paper titled Listening to Narratives, an Experimental Examination of Storytelling in the Classroom. That episodic memory processes, on the other hand, not only involve objects and their connections, but also their structure, their sequential structure, unrelated events, and underlying emotions. This concept is important because these contextual elements, such as the underlying emotions, can be entirely absent in a semantic learning environment. This way, we want the flipped classroom to kind of address all of these working together in a cognitive space. So we will flip over to a live demonstration and navigate. We're going to cover the student resources. We're going to cover the instructor resources. We'll also cover setting up quizzes and setting up discussion forums, and then briefly grades and reporting. And just before I flip over, I do also want to call attention that we have just released the new version, the new edition of the EMT textbook, also the EMR textbook. They are in their 13th and 8th editions, respectively. Up on screen, we should be seeing the flipped classroom for the EMT 13th edition textbook. So a little bit of an explanation with the flipped classroom here. One of the big goals of this was not something that we developed here at PSG. This was actually something that was put together by instructors worldwide, giving us examples of lessons that they had implemented at their training departments or agencies that they had found success with. The biggest goal here is we have a traditional learning experience where somebody is sitting in their chair and they're listening to somebody present on stage or in the front of the classroom. And they're reinforcing the PowerPoint slides, or they're telling the student that they need to go back and reread items over and over again. And that's a traditional method, and that can be successful if it's reinforced correctly through assessments and through the hands-on skills. The big goal with the flipped classroom is how do we change that dynamic? How do we make the students more involved without harming their learning experience? So a big goal of this was to receive these training lessons from other departments, other instructors, and merge them together in a way that makes sense with our textbook. That also meant that very clearly it could not be chapter 1, 2, 3. We would have to have lessons that incorporate multiple chapters. We also wanted to take the guesswork completely out of this, from the student side up to the instructor side. When I hear the term flipped classroom, I want to use that with my students, but how do I even start with that? So we developed all these lessons from the student side, because students do better with direction. What pages should I read? What exactly are my objectives or my takeaways from this section? What are things that are going to make this more interesting for me to do the hands-on or to work with my work with my peers? So to that end, the flipped classroom that you can see here is divided into lessons. I'm going to open up lesson 2 for medical terminology. And as this loads, you'll see a few things right off the bat. Right at the very top of the lesson, we will have instructor resources that are hidden from the students. That will include your instructor manual for delivering this lesson. That will also include any handouts or instructor versions of documents that you will need to use for this lesson as an instructor. As we scroll down, we will see the student visible sections. So we have the required resources. The very first thing that a student does when they open up any lesson is to go through that lesson guide. Underneath that, we will have the ebook or the reading material for that lesson. And then part of the flipped classroom is also in some of these lessons incorporating some type of discussion forum. We also have the self-assessment or pre-class quiz along with an in-class quiz. Directly after that, we will flip over to recommended resources. The nice thing about the flipped classroom is that it does include all of the premier resources that you would come to expect out of the EMT textbook: interactive lectures, test prep, virtual mentor lectures, virtual ride-alongs, soft skill simulations, all the lecture outlines, all the learning objectives, all the PowerPoints, and all of the chapter by chapter interactive lectures that are kind of narrated PowerPoint presentations with a quiz at the end. Those are all part of the flipped classroom as part of the premier materials. But then you also get additional resources, additional videos, additional media, additional education that can be delivered to the student. So as part of the recommended resources, you'll see here the standard flashcards, PowerPoint slides, interactive lectures. And then new to the 13th edition, we do also have the incorporation of these assessment in action quizzes, which are a scenario, and they are built in the course automatically. The student will see a scenario and see multiple questions dealing with that scenario that they have to answer. This gets graded automatically if you'd like to make that available to your students. I am going to click on the lesson guide here just to kind of show the student resources first, and then we'll flip over to the instructor resources. So for lesson 2, medical terminology, this will give them an introduction to the concepts. So I mentioned that this will have all of the resources of the Premier package that you would find in a typical Navigate course, but then it also has additional partner content. This could be content from the NAMT, AAP, or just even something as simple as a Khan Academy exercise. This would be an actual EMS call that a student can listen to.
Call McLaren, call Metro Alpha 107.
It's McLaren, go ahead, please.
Hey, McLaren, we got a party one drama for you. Let me know when you're...
So, not to belabor the point there. That's additional media. That is not something that PSG created, of course. That is something that we are incorporating as part of this lesson. If there is an additional media item that the student watches or listens to or reads, there are often optional knowledge check questions that go along with that as well. After that, they are told what pages or what chapters specifically they should be reading out of the textbook. So this is lesson 2, but it is dealing with chapter 6, page 174. And then we are asking that the student actually read chapter 5. The audiobook will also open up to that specific page. After the required resources, we will flip over to the recommended resources, where it is recommended to actually have the students complete the interactive lecture. For that, keep in mind that the interactive lecture will go through the entirety of the chapter, where some of the later lessons may not recommend the lecture because that lesson will deal with 5 pages out of a certain chapter. Every lesson will comprise or contain a self-assessment, a 10-question pre-class quiz. We have the entirety of the EMT 13th edition test bank, which is already in itself 2,300, 2,500 questions. But 30% of those questions are actually written specifically for the flipped classroom. So you'll have the incorporation of the chapter content along with flipped classroom specific objectives. A lot of the flipped classroom will also incorporate hands-on activities or exercises that are designed to get the students out of their comfort zone, and in some cases actually make them uncomfortable, whether that's a presentation to the classroom, like this being a rap song based around medical terminology. We actually have 2 examples here in this lesson.
Cyanosis cause he couldn't breathe. Angina to the chest, body losing heat.
Looking kinda cloudy, man, like a glaucoma. But we know other stuff is taught lymphoma.
Cancer of the blood, have you clenching your fist?
So in a lot of cases, we want to make the students not only involved with their teammates or their peers, but also make them uncomfortable, make them laugh as part of this. There will be trivia games. There will be categorization exercises. There will be build it models that they have to create something like an anatomical heart, anatomically correct heart using candy or using food, or create an example of a birth emergency using a doll, styrofoam, cardboard, kind of get the creative minds kind of opened up here with this. So in some cases, again, we're trying to engage emotion by participation, and sometimes that will make the student uncomfortable because they have to present something. They're going to remember that later on without even realizing it, and that's what kind of makes the flipped classroom fun and more engaging for students. Every in-class session will also begin with a team challenge question of the day. This should be a difficult question for one team to ask the other team. We're trying to stump them, but we're not trying to necessarily waste time with trivia, I would say. Like which agency wrote the white paper, kind of obscure detail versus something that is a little more key content, at least two differences between arteries and veins. Every in-class session also begins with a 20-minute optional team gathering activity. Have the students gather their creations from home for those models, or have them, in some cases, bring their questionnaires that they've filled out that they'll be asked questions off of when they're performing the skills. Have them turn on their computers, work with their teams to try to come up with the question of the day. And then they get congratulations, you've completed this module. Now, if I were to switch over to lesson 3 for anatomy, physiology, and lifespan development, and open up this lesson guide, we will see a very similar structure. This one also has additional animations and videos at the beginning of the lesson. Knowledge checks to go along with that. And this one is asking them for lesson 3 to read chapter 6. We have the audiobook right there. It also incorporates chapter 7. And it's asking them to watch the virtual mentor lecture for the skeleton race. This particular lesson, or this activity for this lesson, is a little more involved. It is asking the students to to draw and cut out a life-size skeleton on something like butcher paper, or maybe you have something laminated and put it on magnets. But the end goal is that they are going to be racing members of another team to put that skeleton together in the correct order as quickly as possible. We also have in this one, draw and cut out life-size versions of the following organs. Additional videos. And then we flip over to the recommended resources. All of this to illustrate that most of the lessons, even though the activities for these will vary widely, the general structure is going to be the same. Have the students read the material beforehand, have them prepare and bring something to the classroom, or maybe perform something in the classroom. Also have them go through the typical content that you would find in the EMT 13th edition, like the lecture, the flashcards, PowerPoint slides. And then have them complete a pre-class quiz along with the team gathering activity at the end. Now I'll return back to medical terminology here. And just glancing over at the chat, we are actually working in the EMT 13th edition flipped classroom. This just released as of 2 weeks ago. A lot of the concepts that I will show you here, a lot of the functionality will be legacy or pre-existing from the 12th edition. But anything that we can do here, we can also move into the 13th edition with. So with the student side out of the way, we have the required resources. We have the lesson guide. We have the ebook. In some cases, we will also have a discussion forum. We'll have a self-assessment pre-class quiz, in-class quiz. Something I did not mention here is that these are only 10 questions apiece. We chose to make these kind of a very small set of questions. That way, there's a very small margin for error. If a student misses 2 or 3 questions, that's probably a topic that they need to go back and review. You could modify that if you'd like to. We do give you the full test bank. So if you want to make that more than the typical 10 questions, that is absolutely something that you can do. I'm going to flip over and show you the instructor side of this, and then we'll talk about assessments and we'll talk about some of the reporting that is available here. So from the instructor, we also want to take the guesswork out of this. How do I incorporate this lesson? How do I deliver this? What materials do I need for this? So to that end, you are going to have this lesson plan listed right here. Now, I like to say that this starts off as kind of like a pyramid, starts off as kind of an iceberg. What you see at the very top, you will actually have a lot more information as we scroll down. You'll get a lot more context as we scroll down. What you're seeing in this gray section is going to be the pre-class time. So you will see required activities to be completed before the reading. And required reading could be 90 minutes to read 20 pages, could be 90 minutes to read 30 pages. We do kind of err on the side of caution to give the students a lot of reading time here available. In case we do have any students who like to take their time, or maybe they need additional tools like the audiobook to listen to while they're actually visually reading the textbook. Self-assessment, 10 questions, 10 minutes. Prep time for rap songs. Prep time for the team challenge. And then we flip over to the in-class time. Team gathering activity, team challenge, in-class quiz, and in-class review. And then we usually have the lesson-specific activities. And then we will have debrief, or sometimes it is also called golden nugget time. This is something that even the golden nugget time is meant to be a period of reflection. It's meant to be what do the students struggle with the most out of this lesson. What is something that they want to have more time potentially to be spent on. Sometimes the golden nugget or the debrief, even that is wrapped up into the actual lesson delivery. For patient assessment, for example, we have the students stand in a circle holding hands to get beyond that patient skin contact hesitation. So as I scroll down, we'll get a lot more context here. What videos are the students actually going to be watching? What pages specifically will they be reading? And then we get to the in-class time. And then as I scroll down even beyond this, what resources and materials do I need as an instructor or training department to administer this lesson? These should be things that you either already have on hand or that can be purchased inexpensively. The nice thing about this is that we do make this uniform. So as I said, the lessons, the activities for those lessons will vary widely from lesson to lesson, but we like to kind of keep it in a certain structure. The in-class quiz, the lesson-specific activities, the on-hand skills, or the wrap-up and review. That also comes down to the instructions for this. Every single one of these lesson documents for the instructor will have instructions on how to set up that self-assessment lesson. Even for the team challenge, we give recommendations for team rotations. And then as we scroll down, have the students perform their rap song, 1 minute. And then we have an in-class activity here for abbreviations. If there is any lesson activity here that may not be visible as part of the student guide, you will have your full objectives listed and outlined in this document. It will also have answer keys for the instructor. So if there is ever any kind of trivia game or scenario, you will have all of your answers displayed here as well. Some of the lessons will contain a sorted activity, again, categorization exercise. And so this is having students organize prefixes, root words, and suffixes into separate piles, and they're placing the definition cards in a pile, and they're laying those down on the table and trying to categorize those as quickly as possible. And just an additional example of an activity for this particular lesson. So flipping back to the Navigate course, we have the lesson plan here for the instructor. We also have the sorted cards here. For the categorization exercise. Just like we did with the last lesson, if I flip over to lesson 3, you will see all of these documents currently hidden from the students. Case study slides, color the heart handout, casino cards, and then the lesson plan for lesson 3. Additionally, if I flip out to the main page of the course, we do have this teaching tools area that is hidden from the students. If I expand this here, we have the course plan. This will have the breakdown of all of the hours for the flipped classroom. This will actually show the in-class time. All the pre-class time is listed on the actual lesson plan for each individual lesson. But we have all of this split out into 28 lessons. This is a little bit different than the 12th edition that has 27 lessons. For the 13th edition of the EMT, this will also contrast with the paramedic flipped classroom. Nancy Caroline has 75 lessons. And then Sanders has a flipped classroom as well for paramedic that is also going to be up there in lessons. I believe that's around the 60s for the number of lessons available there. But as we scroll down through here, we'll see lesson 1 for CPR. This is front loaded intentionally in case your students need to have CPR training before they come to your EMT class. That there's a reason for this being at the top there. Same thing for medical terminology and A&P. Sometimes some programs will have students have that training as part of a different classroom or concurrent with the beginning of this EMT classroom or before they arrive as part of your EMT course. This is all, again, going to display in class time. We do have optional here in case your students need to have CPR training before they come to your class. Maybe this is a lesson that you spend less time in or you do not incorporate at all. Then we'll flip over to the assessment, airway, and respiratory unit, trauma unit, and you'll see here how out of order some of these chapters are. Medical, special populations, and professional development unit. Something to point out here with the 13th edition specifically, the pediatric and geriatric chapters have been actually incorporated throughout the majority of the text itself. So you will see here this says not available for associated chapter. For pediatric, that's because a lot of the pediatric care has been incorporated throughout the entirety of the textbook. That way we're reinforcing that pediatric content and it falls in line with the most recent guidelines. Now, this is meant to be a classroom that you can reconfigure if there are certain chapters or certain topics that you would like to not have in a flipped concept. That is something that you can do. That's why we give you all the EMT Premier resources. If there's something that you'd like to kind of move around, this document kind of helps with that structure. Usually you want to keep the units together, but you can certainly move lesson 7 around inside the intro unit if you'd like, or lesson 11 inside the airway unit. Now, at this point, I will head back to the Navigate course. And we'll actually turn editing on. That's going to be your major component as instructor. When we give you all the lesson guides, we give you the test bank, we give you the general structure for every single lesson. What we do not set up for you that will be necessary are going to be those self-assessment quizzes, if you're going to use them as is for the 10 questions, or the in-class quizzes for 10 questions apiece. So with editing turned on, you'll see all of these sections expanded. You'll see some of the typical or standard EMT 13th edition content here. And then as we scroll down, we'll see the soft skill simulations or responder mental health resources before we get into the lessons themselves. So if I were to scroll down to lesson 2, in preparation for today's demonstration, I did set up these quizzes here. I also set up a discussion forum here. If I wanted to scroll down to lesson 3, which does not have those quizzes, with editing turned on, as I get into the bottom of ebook chapter 7, I can click on that and add 2 different types of items. If it's a resource, this is something that I want the students to read, to watch, to download, to open up, but I don't necessarily care about tracking. It could be my SOPs for the class, or it could be my course syllabus. It could be an article that I've written as an EMS professional, and I put that in as a document here. Or maybe I put a link in here to a YouTube video that shows how a certain skill is performed incorrectly or correctly. Basically, anything you want the students to access and to digest, but you don't necessarily care about tracking or grading on that. Compared to activities. Activities are a lot more colorful, and by that virtue, actually a lot more interactive. They typically have tracking. They typically have grading. You'll see things like discussion forums that you could set up, questionnaires where you could write your own surveys and questions here. The quiz and assignments, however, and then we also will circle back to the discussion forums here. I'm going to click on quiz just to call out that any type of assessment in Navigate is called a quiz, whether that's a midterm, final, or a block exam, or in this case, a self-assessment quiz. As I scroll down, there are quite a few settings and quite a few options that can be set here. I know my talking head is in the way there. There are quite a few options here that you could adjust. I'm a big fan of showing instructors a few of the sections that they'll want to be mindful of every single time. You do not have to open up every single setting that you see here. A lot of these are already set for you. Case in point, we show the students one question, shuffle the correct answers within the questions. But otherwise, you probably want to be mindful of timing. If you want to set an open and close date for that quiz, or you want to set a time limit on that test. Grade, if you want to set a passing score or require a passing score and control the number of attempts that a student has to get to that. Additionally, if you would like the student to review, we have multiple options here as far as, do I want to feed the student the correct answer? Or maybe I want them to get the feedback from that question as far as where that question came from and what topic it covers. I'm going to hit save and display right down here. Get a little confirmation. Basic information over this test. I'm allowing 4 attempts. I'm taking the highest out of those 4 attempts, and I'm requiring 80. out of 100, but no questions have been added yet, so I need to click on Add Question. When you have editing turned on and you're creating something inside the course, whether it's a flipped classroom or not, this menu bar is kind of your command central. It will change contextually to whatever you're working with. So I'm building a quiz, so now I have quiz settings right up here. This will come in handy in the future if you have students who have made attempts on this quiz and you want to see how they performed on it. You can actually click on that quiz, go to the results page, and you'll be able to see when they started it, how long they took, and how they performed on each and every question. We'll see a little bit of that here shortly when we talk about the grade book. I'm going to scroll down here. There is a little add button right here. And there are 3 different methods for adding questions. You could write a question right here now if you have one that you, maybe you have one sitting in a Word document and you just want to present that to the students. You can click on this. It'll give you options for multiple choice, drag and drop, things like that. If you don't care what questions the students get, you can also use randomization. My big caution here is that if you use randomization, it will truly mean every time a student takes that test or makes an attempt, they will see a completely different quiz every single time from student to student. So that will make your item analysis and statistics a little bit more difficult. We have right here from the question bank directly where you can actually see the categories. You can see what questions you would like to give to the students and kind of make your own best judgment there. I'm going to click on this here. It's going to give me a drop down for the test bank. So we have all the categories listed here. If I want to just simply add the 10 questions here for the lesson 3 self-assessment, I could click on this and then click on apply filter and that would be it. But as I scroll down, there are other categories here for in-class quizzes. So you would do this exact same process if you wanted to also set up the in-class quiz. If you want to add additional questions, we also have the overall test bank for each chapter here. So keeping track of what chapters are being used for what lessons would be helpful here because these are additional questions. There is no overlap between these categories. Students will not see the same question for the in-class, the self-assessment, or the test bank. Those are all different questions from each other. The quality of these is also going to be consistent. We will have a diversity of complex, more moderate, easy questions, and they're all going to be multiple choice. If you would like to incorporate the new technology enhanced item types, the multiple response, the drag and drop, the image questions, categorization questions, we do also give you to the 13th edition these clinical judgment scenarios that are available here for each chapter. All of these will build off of typically 1 or 2 scenarios and ask the students various questions off of those. These are not incorporated as part of the general flipped classroom in-class or self-assessment pre-class quizzes, but they are available here as part of your overall test bank. So I'm going to keep this simple. I'm going to scroll back up to that self-assessment for lesson 3. Apply the filter. And I can see here the complexity. I can see the subject, the title, or the area of where that question comes from. And if I wanted to pick and choose for whatever reason less than 10, I can click those here, or I can simply grab all of these and add those to the quiz. Now this quiz has 10 questions. If I go back to lesson 3, that self-assessment is now visible inside the required section. If for whatever reason you decide to not add that in the correct section, or if you added it to the bottom here by the big button for add an activity or resource, you can easily grab that and move it wherever it needs to go. Now, as part of our agenda, we also talked about setting up a discussion forum. I'll quickly run through that, and then we'll get into the grades, and then we'll kind of open up the floor for questions here. I'm going to click the plus sign here, and because a discussion forum is a little more involved, it is part of my more colorful icons. I'll click on discussion forum. For anything that you add to Navigate, you can choose to add a description and have that show on the front page there. A discussion forum is a lot like a quiz in that we have 2 pages to keep track of. We have the general parameters for this in the settings. If I were to scroll down and expand on ratings, I can say that this is going to be judged on an average number of ratings. The student would have to make multiple posts or an average of those ratings, a maximum rating. We're going to judge them on the quality of that. I'm going to keep this at no ratings and hit save and display. You'll remember we did something similar with the quiz where we set some general parameters first, and then we hit save and display. And instead of filling this with questions like I did with the quiz, I want to actually start this off with a discussion topic. So creating the form by itself is not going to really do too much good. We need to actually give the students a little directions, actually direct them on what they should be responding or replying with. So if we add a discussion topic here, and I know this is for lesson 3, not lesson 2, but this would be an example of when the student clicks on that discussion forum, they know what they need to do. They can click on this and then post their own replies or responses to that. Now, the Navigate platform itself, completely containing the flipped classroom itself, will also have its own analytics and reporting. We'll cover through some of that here pretty quickly, just to make sure that we have enough time for questions here. But I will point out on the right-hand side, there's this little bubble. This can be useful for anyone who's just generally using Navigate, not specific to the flipped classroom. We have a time dedication block that will be visible on the right-hand side that will show how much time or give you an estimate of how much time the students are spending inside the course. It looks like there is a little bit of a lag here. So I may flip over to, there we go. So this time dedication block will show how much time your students are generally spending in the course. We do want to stress that this is an estimate. It is not going to be very specific down to the second or minute if someone has multiple tabs opened up here, like I do. But it should still give you an idea of somebody who's only spent 1 minute or 2 minutes versus somebody who has several hours logged. In addition to that report, we have the gradebook. This will be a spreadsheet of all of your students listed top to bottom with all of the assignments left to right. I mentioned that if you have a quiz, whether it's a self-assessment or in-class quiz that your students have made attempts on and you want to click on that and see how they performed, you can actually go to the gradebook, click on the quiz, see the number of attempts on that, either by clicking on attempts, or you can go to the results page. And you will see each and every attempt that a student has made, how long they took on that, and what their overall performance was. In addition, when you're on the results page for any quiz, there is a drop down here that appears that you can use to dive into statistics and item analysis and or print a paper quiz. This will actually give you a PDF. Looks like I'm in the way there. This will actually give you a PDF of that quiz with or without an answer key. You do not have to print it. It could be something that you save for your records, but just additional context and options that you'll have here. Jumping back to the gradebook, that will be your review for quizzes. We do also have analytics here for the interactive lectures. If I were to click on this, same concept applies. I have settings and reports up here at the top. My options in that gold bar have changed depending on what item I'm looking at. So if I were to scroll down, I can see here the attempts for this student, when they were made, their overall score. And if I click on that attempt, I can see how long they took on that module, or see how far they've progressed inside the actual lecture itself. Now, there is a lot more customization that can happen with the gradebook. You can set up categories, you can set up subcategories, you can have categories just for the quizzes, you can have categories for homework, you can have categories just for the interactive lectures. Here, as part of the solutions consultants team, we are more than happy to set up a webinar with you. We can go through the gradebook and make sure that it fits your structure and your needs. Now, at this point, we'll turn it over for any questions. I don't believe that we can unmute individual people, but we can see what questions might still be sitting in the chat or Q&A. I do see a question here from an instructor. Do you count any of the quizzes or assignments that are done prior to class as part of the grade, or as complete or incomplete? By default, these are going to score out of 100% with those 10 questions. If you wanted to put those into a category where the value is complete and complete, that is something that can be done. It can be done on a category level. So just put all the quizzes inside their own category, make sure that the grading aggregate method for that category is set to complete and complete. Same person asking for nursing. I think I also saw a question here about firefighting and EMR. We do thrive on feedback for this. I think EMR as a flipped classroom has been up in discussion. Same thing with a firefighter. It's not something that we currently have available yet, but that is something that we are always taking feedback on. If it makes sense for the curriculum, it's definitely something that we would love to expand on. And we have quite a few options here in chat. I'm just seeing just kind of immediately. If you wanted to print off the grade book, that's not specific to the flipped classroom, but for the grade book itself, we do have a drop down when you go to the grades. There is an option right here to export the grades at the very bottom onto an Excel sheet or CSV, whatever you'd like to actually export that as.
Marcus asked about the cumulative time within the course.
That is a good question. We'd have to take a look at the individual lesson plans for the course. I don't know if it's summarized in the overall lesson plan I brought out earlier. We can get that information for you for sure. It should meet typical training standards for minimum time needed for that. Bear in mind that the pre-class time sometimes can be double the in-class time, just because of multiple chapters that would need to be read by the student. Yeah, we can definitely have that as a follow-up. There is a good question here for asking how the flipped classroom works in practice, or what that would look like in the classrooms. We will have that additional webinar hosted by Dave Page, who is the grandmaster of the flipped classroom, the primary expert on the flipped classroom. He will be speaking more towards the in-class implementation versus the Navigate tools that are available to you, and the way it was developed or why it was developed with these resources available. There was a question here for gaining access to Navigate to set this up for an upcoming class prior to students purchasing textbooks. That would actually be accomplished through your sales account manager. If you were to go to our website and there's a contact us form there for your state, your account manager can set up a Navigate course for you. Navigate courses are always complimentary for instructors. We only ever have any cost for the individual student textbook itself. So if you'd like to set up a Navigate course ahead of time before an upcoming class, make sure you have everything kind of set up as you needed, or ask any questions necessary. That is absolutely something that can be done at any time. And
Ramon, David just asked, are the flipped classroom materials just part of the Premier package?
so that's a good question. Just to make that distinction, we have the flipped classroom available at the very top of kind of a hierarchy for the textbook typically. So for EMT, for Nancy Caroline, for Sanders, typically we'll have the flipped classroom at the very top, and then underneath that we'll have the Premier. So there is a cost difference there that your account manager can kind of cover. With certain textbooks, we will also have an Advantage level, which is below the Premier. And typically speaking, Advantage level has the ebook, it has the test prep, it does not have the interactive lectures, whereas Premier adds the interactive lectures, and then Flipped Classroom adds all of the structure around that. That also kind of gives a different perspective to the Flipped Classroom. So if we give somebody the Premier package, it's the PowerPoint slides, lecture outlines, learning objectives. It's kind of the Wild West. You're at your own devices for what you want to do or how you want to deliver that information. If we give you the Flipped Classroom, however, we give you those lesson plans. We change the structure of all the chapters, but we are in effect giving you the how-to for all of that. So it does vary. Maybe one personality might gravitate more towards a flipped classroom, just kind of have everything structured with the flexibility to change things, whereas somebody else might gravitate towards Premier, where they're given all the resources and they get to decide how to deliver that. And I'm going to flip back to the PowerPoint here, just to kind of showcase a little bit more information over the upcoming webinar as well. So we talked about the new textbook, EMT 13th edition, just released. Flipped Classroom for the 13th edition was just released within the last week or so. EMR 8th edition also just came out, just standard EMR. We do have that upcoming webinar over the Flipped Classroom on 4/30 of this month. There is a registration link that was put into the chat. We do also have that here. So for anyone receiving a copy of this recording, you can use either. Dave Page, like I said, is kind of the leading expert on the Flipped Classroom. The specific components that he's going to discuss on his webinar will be those pre-class assignments, the interactive learning tools and instructor resources, and then strategies for implementing this into the classroom itself. So that way we're kind of connecting the dots on this, on how this is implemented, what you can expect to be doing as an instructor while the students are doing these activities or hands-on items in the Flipped Classroom. And even though this will specify that this is for EMT, I think there's still a lot of value there in sitting on it as a paramedic instructor, because it's more about the delivery and the theory behind actually delivering this in a Flipped Classroom. There is a little bit of blurb here that we have in the instructor guide that will be in that teaching tools area at the very top, where sometimes the idea or the thought behind this can be that it frees up classroom time. In reality, you should really be thinking about this as immersion into the experience, into the learning experience for the students. They are going to be reading things before class. They are already being immersed into the concepts and skills that they should be aware of, so that when we get to class, we're reinforcing that through the hands-on, through the emotional activities, or through the games and exercise. So yes, that may lead to some more free time for the instructor, but really the thought behind this should be, let's immerse the students into this and make sure that they're getting the knowledge at home, in classroom, and even beyond that when they don't even realize that they're memorizing this content. We do have a really great question here. If there's any research on the correlation of flipped classroom versus traditional classroom and pass rates on the NRMT. If you actually go to our FISDAP.net website, there is a page there for research, which will show research that has been done over the last 10 to 12 years over the flipped classroom. Again, the practice behind this being that we did not want to harm a traditional learning student's learning experience. We want to enhance it. So there actually has been research done over the pilot programs that were implemented and then beyond that. And some of that research was actually done by our FISDAP testing manager, Dr. Leah Tilden. So I definitely encourage you, anyone, to go to FISDAP.net, and in the research section, we do have research constructs and studies that have been done. All right. Beyond that, any additional questions or anything else that anyone would like to ask? We'll kind of hold the floor here for another minute. Great questions, great participation today. And one final question here that was asked, if somebody registers for the webinars and is not able to attend, yes, you will still get a copy of that. So if you're not able to make it, we can definitely make sure that you get a copy of the video that was asked. We often send out surveys at the end of this just to kind of improve our processes and help with our quality and give you what you need. So we would definitely appreciate if you give us any feedback, if this was useful for you, if you would like to see additional webinars like this. This will be an ongoing series every time. So we do have open registrations for other webinars throughout the year. But we definitely appreciate your feedback for any additional topics that you'd like to see covered, or how we can improve this one as well. All right. Thank you all so much for your time today. Have a great rest of your week. And please let us know if you would like to set up a webinar to go over the how-tos or even just have additional questions. Please reach out to your account manager on psjlearning.com or jblearning.com. We can always set up a 30-minute meeting or a 1-hour meeting to discuss more. We are here to help you, as are your account managers. All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.